What is the product that you launched, or what kind of requirements that do infrastructure PMs typically get?
It is a tool that is used by Mark and the entire leadership team at Meta to plan capacity. Mark said we are spending $65 billion plus on infrastructure. So the first thing you need to do when you spend some that kind of money is decide where are the next data centers going to be.
Could you go into the details of the fundamentals of inference? What are you doing there?
A lot of folks think of it as a disjoint process that you're done with inference and you're starting training now, or you're done with training or starting inference. It's not as 0-1 as you would think. Let me explain a bit.
How does Instagram and Facebook work? Like when I think about Instagram, it's basically recommending new content to people. So how do people use models there?
The most common way you would use AI models in Instagram is recommendation feeds. If you go to watching your short form videos and you're scrolling, depending on how much time you spent on a video, how much of it you watched, and how quickly you swiped up, that would all be fed into a model to sort of make the decision or infer what exactly is the next kind of video you would like.
Can you go into details of what are some of the complexities, right? How do these things scale?
Upfront cost of training is really high. You have to set up hardware, you have to set up something called supporting services, which is your data set on which you train. You have to set up networks so that the systems can communicate with each other. There's a lot of upfront cost.
I think eventually this is serving billions of people and the impact is huge.
This is an impact on our entire footprint, on the entire company and the 4 billion plus users who are using it. So the impact is huge, but also it takes a lot of time to build these products.
If you are an MBA graduate, right? Which company would you recommend?
I would always go with Amazon as my first PM job.
So now that let's assume you have convinced people to move as an infra PM. If I were somebody who's wanting to move to an infra role, right? So how could I transition into an infra role, and what are some of the growth opportunities that I could expect?
To transition to an infra role would very much depend on sort of where you are in your PM career journey. If you're early PM, I would still say it is a very challenging role.
Hey Rahul, welcome to the podcast. Can you get started with a very quick introduction about yourself?
Yep. My name is Rahul. I'm a PM at Meta currently. I've been in this space for about 10 years. I started my career as an engineer back in India with Cisco and Samsung. So a whole bunch of networking and mobile backbone technologies. And for the past few years, I've been a PM across different infrastructure components focused on AWS and public clouds, Prime Video from the entertainment side, Microsoft in terms of enterprise collaboration. And now currently at Meta, I'm focused on building the internal processes, systems, and tools required to run end-to-end Meta private cloud, which is about 25 to 30 billion of Meta's CapEx spend.
Awesome. Sounds great, Rahul. So most of your roles are, could I say, are you an infrastructure PM?
Yes. Yep.
Okay.
I'm a dedicated infrastructure PM. I've been doing this for about 8 years. For different kinds of infrastructure pipelines. Entertainment has a different kind of infrastructure pipeline. Public cloud has a different kind of infrastructure pipeline and its requirements. Enterprise collaboration has a different piece because it's a Microsoft. It runs on internal Azure. So I've been in infrastructure for about 6 to 7 years now. Yeah.
Yeah. Awesome. Yeah. And I think we'll go into more details of what does an infrastructure PM do, what are some of the opportunities, and at least in our previous conversation, what I heard is this is like a very hot space with so much of infra compute being used for AI training and all of that stuff, and we'll get into more of those details. But before that, right, I would want to just start with fundamentals, right? I've seen that in the last 4-5 weeks, there's so much AI news that's coming out. And I think one of the prominent piece was about DeepSeek, right? DeepSeek training their models with 5 million or less. I know there are commentary around is it just 5 million, or they have used more or less, and so on and so forth. But that's still, they have released a lot of papers on different ways to train, right? So and OpenAI, I believe, for ChatGPT has used maybe 100 million of infra to train their models, right? And I think when we go into the basics of this, right, I think this is very important to understand for anybody who's listening here. So I think let's maybe deep dive into some of the fundamentals of inference. So before I go into that, I would just give people a little more context on what inference and training are. So essentially, models go through training and inference, and training is something where you start training the models on large sets of data. And once the training is done, when you put it into production, right, whenever anybody asks, gives it a prompt, whatever it does in the background uses its knowledge, it's inference, right? So If I'm not wrong, could you go into the details of the fundamentals of inference? What are you doing there, and also throw some light of how could this be scaled, and what are some products that you are building to help it more efficient?
Yeah, so in general, every AI model goes through this life cycle of training and inference, and a lot of folks think of it as a disjoint process that you're done with inference and you're starting training now, or you're done with training or starting inference. It's not as 0-1 as you would think. Let me explain a bit. So training is essentially, as you said, you feed model labeled data, so structured data, and understand and make it like figure out how exactly the data is related, what is the correlation of properties, so it can make sense of that data. Inference is when I'm giving you unlabeled, unstructured data, and like the model has to give me an output. For like LLMs, inference would look like generating new content. So like I'm giving you a text, asking you to write a story. You look at your previous training data, which is a bunch of stories that the model has been fed, and it writes the new story in that tone, in that sort of structure, and in that thinking as a writer, right? So that's inference for an LLM. For like a most common predictive model, it is just predicting your next line of text, or you're writing an email, it's predicting that's inference for a model. But these two things are not very separate. So if I have to use an analogy, I have a golden retriever, I have a dog, right? You train a dog, you try to train them how to play fetch by throwing a ball, they bring the ball back, give it a treat, and that's how you train them how to fetch a ball. That is just a training piece. Inference is when I'm asking him to fetch something else, fetch something from his toy box, fetch a frisbee. That's inference for him. He's not doing the same exercise he was trained to do. He's extending that logic to other areas, other objects, other spaces, problem spaces.
So if I can add, so essentially he's generalizing the knowledge which he has gained through the training that was done and using it to other applications, which is completely slightly different than what it is. So if you were to correlate that with something what we do on regular basis, right? So imagine I'm preparing for a math exam. So I'm going through so much of notes, information, trying to figure out how to do certain things, how to learn certain things, and also I'll maybe doing some practice questions on how to solve it using that knowledge. But when I go to the exam, I might not get the same question, but I'm trying to apply that knowledge into a different question and trying to solve that. So that's basically inference.
It is, but if I was to go one step further in analogy, it is not just you're doing a math exam. It could be a specialized version of math. It could be I'm doing arithmetic only, or geometry only, or differential calculus only. So I learned on the base set, but I'm not extending that technology out like further areas. So that's when I said the general assumption is training and inference are very binary. Even after you train a model, it's not done. Through the life cycle of the model, and this is one of the things we at Meta do called distributed inference. So because you've trained the model once, it's been published. So it is ready for consumption for products like Instagram, Facebook. But you always are getting new data. So let's say this entire month I trained the model, I put it in published state, and Instagram is using it. But we realize there's a new trend where people are watching a lot of dog videos. So you have to retrain part of the model to just recommend more dog videos to certain users. So you take a part of the model, retrain it, and update it in the inference pipeline. So now the model knows something new. Because that's always a challenge with AI models, where they learn something, and if they don't keep constantly updating, they become stale.
And that's very interesting here. So in general, I could think about text and see like how a model interprets the new text and then generates whatever is the outcome that it gives. How does Instagram and Facebook work? Like when I think about Instagram, it's basically recommending new content to people. So how do people use models there?
The most common way you would use AI models in Instagram is the recommendation feeds. If you go to like watching your short form videos and you're scrolling, depending on how much time you spent on a video, how much of it you watched, and how quickly you swiped up, that would all be fed into a model to sort of make the decision or infer what exactly is the next kind of video you would like. Right now, that also includes like your likes, dislikes, all that stuff is taken into account. But as I said, the model has been previously trained on all your preferences or other users' preferences of what video is sort of hot. But there's a possibility that some things have changed, and now everybody's watching videos of the Emmys or something else that happened recently in the world. So that part of the model will be updated so that when you keep swiping, you might come across some new content. So that's what we call snapshot update.
I want to ask like one quick, I want to make it as simple as possible, right? Let's take Sidhu, let's take me. So already Instagram understands both of us, and whenever I go to Instagram, it just gives me a feed. Let's say now I go and like a specific video or comment on a specific video. What I'm guessing is this new inputs are being fed to a model, and that model continually outputs saying that, hey, these are the new videos that you need to show to fun. Now, let's say you have a new model that you launched from Meta. Let's say I'm the PM for Instagram. Now, I want to use this new model. I'll just replace your old model and start feeding the new data to it. Is that what you do?
Not 100%, because if you replace the entirety of the model, it has obviously forgotten what you liked in the past. So we update parts of a model.
So
That's
different.
why there is yes, it is a differential then.
Okay.
Because models are constantly learning, right? And if you have the entire model being replaced, you lose all the context that the model has learned over the time.
So I'm thinking, so most of the time this goes hand in hand, right? So there is also always training that's going on, and
Yes.
there is also inference. And how frequently is this updated? Like, can you share that information? Is it like pace or
As frequently as the product requires it, technically. The reason we have a single platform for inference across Meta, what is called IP Next, is because we do want to update models quickly so that our users don't fall into the stale sort of state. They don't see old content, things like that. So as the product requirements come in to us from Instagram or Facebook or WhatsApp or even Reels now, they will tell us how often they want the model to be updated. And based on that, it is the platform that makes a decision of how quickly to update these things. The challenge here that people don't realize is these parts are being updated in very small increments, so you do have to keep them in sync. So you have to make sure when you replace a part, it is still aware that there's a previously said, like you might have 10 parts to a model. I'm replacing only 2. It still has to communicate with the remaining 8 to make sure your content makes sense, and you don't see something that is absolutely out of the blue and you're like, why am I seeing this now?
Just for the audience to understand, right? What is differential inference?
We call it distributed inference, and it is the fact that a model individually is doing inference at a base layer, and then you have parts of the model, they're doing their own inference. So it's all contributing to that parent model. Think of it as a tree. So you have the base layer, and then you have that model divided into different parts, and each of the part has its own snapshot. Snapshot is basically its memory in time. So a model can be divided into like 3 or 4 parts. Each of those parts have a snapshot. There's a snapshot who's serving you inference. So distributed inference means a snapshot can serve you inference. It can aggregate all the inference together and serve it at the parent layer. So it is depending on what the user is looking for. If you just want to see videos in the same sort of theme or content, you keep scrolling, it is the parent who is doing inference. But if you, let's say you want to like spice up the feed and you want to see something new, it might be a new snapshot that was just updated and it knows about, let's say, a recent event. So it will serve you that kind of video. So that's what distributed inference looks like for Instagram.
So if you were to compare training versus inference, right? I see that a lot of people talk about just the amount spent on training, but I think inference is also as important or even more than the training data, right? And I think it costs even more than what training is, right? I think this is a myth, right? A lot of people have seen DeepSeek training it with 5 million. They said, okay, I'll sell all my NVIDIA shares because maybe companies don't need as much compute as they would need before. But I think that's not the truth there, right? Just companies still need a lot more as AI systems are increasing. Can you go into the details of like what are some of the complexities, right? How do these things scale? How does the hardware work, or at least the mechanics of the platform itself?
Yeah, DeepSeek had a huge hype cycle. Definitely, I feel that the market reaction was an overreaction from people who are basically trading on the hype cycle. Not really. They don't care about the fundamentals of a company or a business. But if you look at the training versus inference cost over the life cycle of the model itself, 90% of the cost will be on inference. That's how long-lived a model is, right? Like if you look at just model being trained and that's it, yes, it is expensive. The upfront cost of training is really high. You have to set up hardware. You have to set up something called supporting services, which is your data set on which you train. You have to set up networks so that the systems can communicate with each other. There's a lot of upfront cost, but that is literally 10% of the total cost of inference over time. And especially for companies like Meta who have so many users, imagine a model that just gives you the next video. That's all it does. You train it once and a bunch of data, you give it feed a bunch of data, you're using a bunch of NVIDIA accelerators, but then it has to serve traffic to 4 billion people across all these different surfaces, and it has to do that for years. So that's why the cost of inference over time is 90%. But that's where also people like the companies make money, because inference is part of your revenue stream, whereas training is your cost. So if you look at the books for the company, training is literally where you're spending money, inference is where you're making money. The challenge is for most companies in the market today, the reason you hear so much about the training cost is they haven't figured out how to make money off inference, because inference is not a natural part of their business. So everybody's trying to figure out how to fit inference in their business so that they can actually recoup some of the money they spent on training. So that's the biggest sort of misnomer about training versus inference. Yes, training is expensive, but is negligible compared to the cost of inference over the lifetime of the model.
So if we compare this with what, so we look at all of these models, right? So most of the models are closed source, but Meta open sources its models, right? LLMs, and recently we have seen DeepSeek doing that. So you're saying that whatever they've spent, they're spending it on training, and other companies who want to use them would still have to spend on inference by running these models inside a cloud or their own infrastructure, right?
Exactly. There are companies that offer, and I don't know if DeepSeek is doing this or not. So DeepSeek basically allows you to run inference locally on a machine. So you're not spending anything. You can just using your machine to run inference. Does have certain amount of requirement on hardware, but if you have a good enough laptop, you can run DeepSeek on it, right? If you are doing this at an enterprise level, yes, you'll need to use like a public cloud or like a Oracle cloud or something like that to run inference at scale. But again, if you look at the cost of running this as part of the business, inference, if it fits well into your business, is a money maker. You don't lose money on inference because that's where your user getting some value of it. Like think about Amazon. If Amazon is using inference in its business model, it's recommending you the stuff you want to buy. You buy that from Amazon, and Amazon makes money off it. So inference, if it fits well into the business model, is actually helping you make a lot of money. The challenge is most companies are still trying to figure out how to really serve inference at scale and make money off it. Like OpenAI has a subscription model, things like that. So we are still in the early stages of newer businesses, even older businesses in some cases, to figure out how inference fits in their business and revenue model.
Okay, awesome. Sounds good. So yeah, I want to also, let's maybe unpack this infra PM piece a bit on the platform which you are trying to work, right? So I think this is fairly technical and it involves a lot of working with a lot of technical folks and all, right? So what does a product manager actually do? And if you could share thoughts about what impact is the product manager adding in these kinds of roles and specifically the platform which you are working on.
Yeah, so the infra PM role, technically nobody calls it infra PM because that's not like infra can be at any layer of the stack. There are a few people at Meta who belong to something which is like very close to bare metal. Bare metal is actually the server. So we work very close to the bare metal because we work on the services layer. So if you think of what exactly we do, we serve our customers. The challenge with an infra PM role is you have multiple personas of customers and you have multiple layers of customers. What do I mean by that? I work on building the service foundation. On top of that, there is an inference engine, which is used by AI engineers, like who are the ones who are building the inference engine. On top of that, you have MLEs, machine learning engineers. And then you at the end using Instagram or Facebook are the eventual users. So I, as an infrastructure PM, have to think of all three layers of customers. What do you need as a user on Instagram? You need performance. You need something to really show up quickly. You need to have the right videos show up in your feed so that you can enjoy the experience. What does an ML engineer need? They are focused on building and training models. They don't want to see all the complexity of infra. What does an AI infra engineer need? He needs a way to sort of make sure this whole snapshot transition and the workflow I was describing can be handled by infra seamlessly so that they don't have to worry about I'm training my model in the US, but my data is located in some other country. So I have to pay cross network costs across the Atlantic. All that stuff they don't need to worry about. It is taken care of by infra. So as an infra PM, my job is to make sure all three layers of my customers, their requirements are met. And the way we add value is we have to think over a long time horizon. This is not something that gets built in 3 months and gets shipped. It's a multi-year project. So one of the unique parts of being an infra PM is, yes, you are building a lot of things, but they might not come to market for a year, 2 years maybe. The project I'm on right now, we launched an MVP after 18 months of work. So it does take a longer time horizon just because the impact is not just on one user or 100 users or 1,000 users. This is an impact on our entire footprint, on the entire company and the 4 billion plus users who are using it. So the impact is huge, but also it takes a lot of time to build these products.
Awesome. So you're actually getting a lot of these needs from different personas, and I think eventually this is serving billions of people and the impact is huge.
Yes. You also have to reconcile because some of those requirements sometimes are contradictory to each other because not all three personas will speak the same language. So it is your job to make sure the product we're building suffices all of them, but at the same time makes sense to all three users. Because again, they're different. Each of those users will understand their space, but not infra. So you have to sort of find the least common denominator and build the product based on that.
I want to understand more on the role, right? So again, all of us like are tech PMs to a certain extent, but I think one of the layers that I don't touch at all is infrastructure.
So most people do.
Maybe can you explain with an example? Let's say you're telling that you launched an MVP, right? After 18 months. Like what is the product that you launched, or what kind of requirements that do infrastructure PMs typically get?
So the product I launched most recently is our internal tool. Like users never get to see that, but it is the tool that is used by Mark and the entire leadership team at Meta to plan capacity. So at some point, every board meeting, you see these results, and Mark has like officially said that we are spending X billion dollars on AI footprint and building new data centers, right? Now, you as Instagram, if you have to understand the nitty gritties of how data center works, where is my traffic, how am I like making sure the servers are available, all that stuff, it is not your strong suit. You are building Instagram as a user experience, right? So it is an infrastructure to hide all that complexity and just give you what you need. If you're Instagram, you need to serve traffic to 1 billion users. How do you do that at scale, while at the same time making sure you have enough buffers? Let's say some disaster happens and things go down in one of the data centers. How do you make sure that never impacts users? So the tool I'm building right now allows Mark and then the leadership team and sort of all internal applications, Facebook, Instagram, and WhatsApp, to make these decisions and even trade capacity sometimes. So let's say US elections are happening. Facebook needs more capacity than it requires because there's a lot of prevention we need to do, make sure there's no fake news and those kind of things. Instagram might have to loan capacity to Facebook. How does that work? Those are transactions, and the whole accounting of this billions of dollars that is going through the private cloud at Meta is taking care of my tool. At the same time, let's say I am launching something in Brazil. It's a new feature for Instagram in Brazil. How do we make sure we are spending our dollars in the best way? What is the ROI on that? So for ROI, obviously Instagram will tell you this is how much money you will make. What is the investment on that? That's what comes from my tool, because you have to make sure the money you're spending on infrastructure makes sense for the sort of return you're getting on it from user acquisition or incremental revenue when a user is using Instagram. So those all decisions have to be sort of consolidated in one place. They all have to speak the same language. Again, we have a bunch of users. We have leadership, who's our user. We have Instagram, Facebook, who's our user. We have engineers who are actually building features, and they're like, oh, I need capacity to launch this feature. And all these users come to the same place, look at the same information across the company and say, okay, this is how much capacity I have because NVIDIA delivered a whole bunch of accelerators. So let's divide and conquer and see where is the best bang for a buck.
So essentially, right, like a lot of times PMs were working on the application side, right?
Yes.
Kind of there's a big team who is trying to manage all of the infrastructure under it, and it costs you money to manage that. It's not free, right? So, but exactly. I think, yeah.
Some of these tools are even used to decide like very, very long-term things. So like if you recently read in the recent sort of earnings report, Mark said we are spending $65 billion plus on infrastructure. So the first thing you need to do when you like spend some that kind of money is decide where are the next data centers going to be. Where do I build the data centers? Because I have to buy land, I have to get permits, I have to order capacity, I have to sort of build those buildings, right? That's a very long-term process. And even some of those decisions are driven by this kind of accounting, because we know what we have today, what we are spending, how much is sort of all these systems and all these products, how much money they're making. So what does the long-term horizon look like? So the tool is used both for planning and operations. That's how we split the capacity management. There's a planning aspect where Instagram is telling me this is how much I need for next year, and Mark is giving them dollars. And then for operations, because day to day they might be launching features, they might be making changes to the Inference stack, and we have to support that. So capacity management and operation as a whole is a big part of the sort of operations of a company that you never see. And that happens in every cloud. Because Meta has private cloud, you have certain other challenges, but even public clouds have that, and sort of there are a bunch of people who are dealing with that complexity.
Yeah. And funny, if you remember, right, last time when we were talking to Anita, she's actually director of product, and she works on AI chips. And you are basically the next layer. So funny, we are covering all of the stack.
Yes.
Oh, awesome.
The only person below me you would find is an actual engineer who brings up these racks and data centers.
No, so we were talking to somebody who's actually building the chips, AI chips, the next gen chips.
Silicon.
So the next, so that's, at the silicon level, I'd say.
Yes. Yep.
Awesome. So Rahul, maybe let's switch gears and move to another question here, right? So I know different companies have different ways to approach AI. So, what is Meta's approach to AI, and how is it different from its competitors?
Yeah. So there are two parts to this, I would say. The first is Meta has always believed that open source AI is the way to go, and that's why Llama has always been open source. I would say the one thing that is good that came out of the whole DeepSeek and the hype cycle was the fact that it is pretty clear that open source AI models can be very successful. That is the one learning from this whole experience of DeepSeek being rolled out. It's not that they're doing something better or everybody else is doing something worse. It's the fact that open source AI models will at some point be better than closed source just because of the amount of data they're gathering, the amount of learning that is brought here. So that's our philosophy, that Llama has always been open source. It's been improving year over year. And that's obviously for the larger audience. On the internal side, our philosophy here is that pretty much all our products have AI built in. Previously, it used to be just bare bones recommendation engines. Now it is a lot more advanced. But all our business sort of work streams that we have, Instagram, Facebook, WhatsApp, Reels, Threads, everything has a natural use case for AI to be integrated. And all of them benefit from having better AI integration, and the users benefit from that. So our business is like sort of more naturally inclined to using AI in all the experiences so that the users benefit from that, while at the same time we are developing this open source AI model for the industry. Eventually, the goal is to sort of get best of both worlds so that you have this kind of learning in the sort of, you have all these different users who are using a product, but you can apply your learnings on the Llama side. But I think for now, the biggest thing that we do differently is that we have IP Next, which is our inference layer, which makes sure that when you have Instagram, Facebook, Reels, all these people asking you to do certain things on the inference side, you have one single platform. So you build once and reuse multiple times. So that's what sort of sets our inference strategy slightly apart, because we know for a fact that if we do inference well, the company benefits from it, the users benefit from it, because everybody's using the inference in their daily lives today.
Awesome.
I want to ask about like end users as well. Let's say if I'm someone who's a startup founder, or let's say a general user who wants to use Llama, and I know you guys keep releasing like multiple models and stuff. Can you also talk about how someone can utilize your models and then work on like their general or day-to-day issues that they're solving?
Not directly, funny. I can't speak to that directly because Llama is a whole different internal strategy thing that I'm not a part of. I can tell you that on our end, when infrastructure provides services to Llama, we are doing it in the same way as we would do for any other internal model. So we don't have a distinction of how we provide training or inference to Llama. And obviously, all the information of what data Llama is trained on and everything is public information. But our strategy has always been that Llama is sort of the best possible open source model for you, and then you can feed it your own data. You can feed it a specific type of data. It is what called a distilled model. So you can feed it, let's say you are an AI researcher on just focused on DNA research or something like that. You can feed it a bunch of data on that, and then it becomes your DNA research specialist or something like that, right? So that's the direction Llama is heading. But there's sort of separation between Llama as a product that is used by all users externally in the open source sort of industry, versus everything that is used by Facebook, Instagram, WhatsApp. And those are different kinds of models, different characteristics of models that are used for the users on a daily basis.
Makes sense. Actually, I want to ask you one more thing. Like, you have a very unique experience. You worked in Amazon, Microsoft, and Meta, right? So how do you see the difference between all of these companies?
In terms of like PM culture, or just how companies operate?
Infrastructure, PM culture, primarily. Yeah.
Drastically different, honestly. These companies, in my opinion, are for different types of people in different career stages. I'm actually speaking to a bunch of MBA students later this week to sort of explain the distinction between how a PM role, how do you perceive a PM role, and how do you pick the right PM role for yourself. Amazon, I would say the best part about Amazon is there's no other company in the market who would be ready to take risks on a new PM as much as Amazon does. Because when you join Amazon, you join at an L6 level. And it is a very senior level if you think about it from the industry perspective. There are people who have 10 plus years experience as a PM who join in Amazon. But a fresh MBA also joins in an L6 at Amazon. In fact, from my personal experience, the first project I was given at Amazon was I had to deprecate a video player. And millions of people in Japan were using that video player. And I was like, I graduated MBA 3 months back, and you're asking me to make a call on how to deprecate a product being used by millions of people in Japan. That's the amount of sort of scope you get. But that's also like throwing you at the deep end and trying, like making you learn things quickly. So it is a huge amount of learning at Amazon. The 2 years I was there, I worked on like 30 plus projects, everything from HBO onboarding to like to Prime Video, CBS All Access, Thursday Night Football, launching a bunch of Fire TV devices across the world, and then building our own stuff internally, like the video players that you see on like Android, iOS, and web. So you learn a lot very quickly. So it is good for people who it's their first time PM job. They're trying to figure out what kind of PM they want to be, what is their niche. On the flip side, you never get time to sit down and think, how do I apply this learning? The business moves very fastly. If like Amazon is competing with everybody in the market. They're competing with Netflixes, they're competing with cable, they're competing with pretty much everybody, right? So you never get time to sit down and figure out what is my product strategy for this player? What is my product strategy for this thing? Because the company is so top down that you always sort of have a roadmap already pre-planned, at least the sort of a structure and a skeleton for a roadmap, and you just have to fit your pieces in that roadmap. So that's the con of Amazon. The other con of Amazon, I would say, is pro and con. I would say is you get either really good at writing documents, or you are sort of beaten into it, which is a key skill for a PM. I would say if you can really write a good doc, a one pager that explains your idea, people don't realize how important that skill is across the industry. When I joined Microsoft, the first thing people asked me is, "Can you help us figure out how to write a PR FAQ?" So that's how much companies value this skill at Amazon, where you get really good at writing. You really are sort of enabling on PMs on how to write their ideas, their strategy in a very precise and very simple manner. And then pretty much every company values that. But at Amazon, you never will have a breathing room to like figure out, is this a good enough skill? Am I good enough writing, or should I improve on that? It'll always be just the next project, just the next big thing. That's the sort of pros and cons. Microsoft, on the other hand, the interesting part about Microsoft is, even though I was in a team which is sort of middle in the stack, it's not as deep as I am right now. It is what is called the Microsoft 365 groups layer, one layer above Microsoft internal cloud called Substrate. But because I was at that level of the stack, I was working with both folks who are on the lower stack level, which is the cloud itself, the intelligent cloud that Microsoft uses, and Teams, Outlook, Yammer, all the public facing applications you have. So it's a very broad scope in talking to enterprise customers. Like we were talking to everybody from like Home Depot to Pepsi to Coca-Cola, all these people who are using Microsoft products for their enterprise collaboration. And to some extent, Microsoft is a pretty big player in this space. So all these customers would be really happy to work with you to build like products for their enterprise systems, and their businesses depend on it. So it is a pretty high stakes. But at the same time, because it is Microsoft, you're not in a rush to release the right product. The risk of releasing the wrong product is too high for Microsoft. So they would rather you slow down and say, I'm not going to deliver this for the next 6 months, than do it wrong. Imagine releasing something in Teams and then it is against European GDPR rules. The company would sort of, it could go under if something like that happens. So Microsoft would rather slow down and make sure you do the right thing. And that's where you apply all your learnings from Amazon. That's how I look at my career trajectory. I learned a lot of stuff at Amazon, applied a lot of stuff at Microsoft, and then at Meta, I'm doing both. Because I've never been this deep in the stack or this close to the AI infrastructure. So I'm also learning, but I'm also applying. And you have to sort of do this on a day by day basis. Yeah.
When I think about Amazon, it's at a scale right now where like it can't. When you think about like company that large, you can't typically think about launching a product like extremely fast. But somehow they figured out a way of launching things very fast, still breaking things. Still, the customers are very happy and sticking to the product.
They say it every day is day one.
Yes, it's always day one at Amazon. Yes. And I truly believe that is a fact, because I was never in a place in Amazon where I was like, oh, I don't have anything much to do today. That's never a slow day. And that's great. Like if you're early in your career, you're trying to figure out what you like being about a PM and what you don't like about being a PM. But at some point, you realize this is your niche and you should sort of go deeper in there. So that's when you realize that I might be in a different team, or I might be better suited in a different organization. The other thing that folks would realize is PM culture is not per company. Yes, every company has broad strokes of what a PM is. It is more about the team and the organization. AWS PM culture is very different from Alexa PM culture, from like Prime Video PM culture. So when you're looking at your PM role, your first PM role, even when you're looking to move, always try to understand what that org PM culture looks like, not the company in general, because there will be a lot of nuances there.
Okay. So yeah, now, as you have worked for Amazon, Microsoft, and Meta, I haven't met people working at these three companies, worked at these companies before. I want to ask you a fun question, right? So if you are an MBA graduate, right, which company would you recommend? Rank it by 1, 2, and 3.
Start your PM career? Always Amazon. I would always go with Amazon as my first PM job. I don't regret that at all. But after that, I would probably go to Meta, because if you are in that pace of executing fast, but you still want to sort of do it at a much bigger scale, Meta would be a good place. Microsoft is somewhere I would go if I want to have, and again, it depends on whether you are in an IC role or a manager role. Microsoft is great if you want to run a portfolio of products. You are like a principal or partner level PM who has 6 or 7 people reporting to him. You pretty much own the entire enterprise collaboration suite, right? It's a great place to be in. But I personally, I've always been an IC. I'm always going to be an IC. I never want to be like a people manager. So for people manager, there are not a lot of companies who have very senior IC role for PMs. Meta is one of the few where you can have like an IC8 or IC10 level individual contributor as a PM. So that's a sort of niche thing about Meta, but that also comes with a lot of responsibilities, because at Amazon, I was building something that is used by, let's say, 10 million people. Microsoft, 100 million people. Yes, Outlook is used by 200, 300 million people. Meta, I'm building something that is used by billions of people.
Yeah.
So each level of complexity, each zero you add there adds a lot more complexity to the nuance of what I'm building and if it is the right thing or not. Um, Especially as an ICPM at Meta, ICPMs have a lot more responsibility than you would think, because the product strategy, the execution end to end is all driven by PMs, right? So you don't have like a manager to sort of handhold you and make you learn the system. So if you are a fresh grad, start at Amazon, learn as much as you can, and then figure out, do you want to go to a manager path and manage a bunch of portfolio products together? Go to Microsoft. If you want to grow as an ICPM, really sharpen your skills and be a specialist, go to Meta.
So Meta, I've also heard that it's more like you have an option to pick what you want to build or pick what you want to work on, and
Yes.
right. So and it's also a lot of bottom up approach. So
Yes.
is that
It
true?
is all bottoms up. It is
Okay.
all bottoms up. So right now I'm working on something that has nothing to do with my organization. I'm actually working in something that has to do with AI training. As you know, I don't work closely with training, and I build systems for training and inference, but I don't directly work on AI training. Recently, we came across a problem where my space has an impact on something upstream, and that team that didn't have a PM. So I'm also PMing their engineers. And this is all purely bottoms up. So I have a bunch of people who work with ML engineers. I have a bunch of people who work on AI infra. I have a bunch of people who work on capacity, which is what I own. And we're bringing all of them together to build a new product. And this is not something that you would have to go like to a manager approval for or director approval for. This is all organic, because at Meta, there's a saying that nothing at Meta is somebody else's problem. You come across a problem, you think you're the right person to solve it, go solve it. And you always be sort of getting that credit because it is the right thing to do for the company, right? So as long as you have the right consensus among the right set of engineers, the right set of designers, whoever else is your stakeholder and partner, you can go build the right product. And you'll always have the company support, because again, we're building towards a common goal here.
So essentially, you're looking for problems, and also you have the autonomy to work on them, irrespective of it's related to what you're already building, or or your department which you're building.
Yep.
Okay, makes sense.
Yep. And then where there is a need, you go and sort of jump in and try and solve the problem.
Awesome. So another question, right? So if you were to say, look at the pace of the culture, put it on a scale, laid back versus a serious culture, what do you say, right? Like, how do you rate these companies?
In terms of culture, I would say Meta is pretty laid back. We have a very formal team structure. Like I'm very close friends with my manager. So it's not a very formal structure. I would say the most stringent company I would say is Amazon, because Amazon works on leadership principles. And one of the leadership principles is disagree and commit. So that makes it very difficult for you to be friends with your manager or your director or your VP, because there will be a point in time, and this has happened with me. I was building the ads experience for CBS All Access, and we had to disagree and commit to what our engineering VP wanted. So definitely, it is a very top-down experience. Your VPs and your senior VPs, the S team, they tell you something, and then you sort of have to work in those boundaries. Whereas Meta, it is a much more free-flowing culture. I work on some stuff that none of my team members work on, but we have a very collaboration model. Microsoft is, I think, somewhere in the middle, because Microsoft, there are pockets where there's a lot of people who have been Microsoft for years, and they have a different way they run their teams. Whereas my team, we had a bunch of people coming in from the industry, joining right after MBA. So we had a good mix of people. So it was pretty collaborative, but at the same time, it was still a bit tops down. So I would still say Meta is pretty open-ended in that case. Yeah, you're pretty much, you have a lot of sort of freedom to do what you like and what fits into your interest, but at the same time, impact is what is rewarded.
Awesome. So now that, let's assume you have convinced people to move as a infra PM. So if I were somebody who's wanting to move to an infra role, right? So how could I transition into an infra role, and what are some of the growth opportunities that I could expect?
How to transition to an infra role would very much depend on sort of where you are in your PM career journey. If you're early PM, I would still say it is a very challenging role. It is definitely the most difficult PM role I've ever had. Just because, as I said, we have to think about a whole bunch of different users, and you have to speak their language. So I have to understand what an ML engineer prefers in terms of like what exactly they are looking for in terms of their requirements. I have to understand what an AI infra engineer needs, and at the same time, I have to understand user preferences, like people who are using Facebook and Instagram. So it's definitely a challenging role, but if you are really looking and you are like enough experience and you're looking for an infrastructure role, Amazon has a bunch of them because part of AWS works purely on infrastructure. Microsoft has a bunch of them because you have Azure as well as the enterprise cloud, and you work on those different teams that closely work with customers as well as engineers on the sort of lower side of the stack. Meta definitely has AI infra engineers and infrastructure engineers as myself. The growth opportunity, I would say, the biggest growth opportunity is because you're working with extreme ambiguity, the impact is multiplicative. So if I do something right on my product, the AI infra team is going to use that and build a really great inference engine like IP Next. Everybody in the company, Instagram, Facebook, will use that to further enhance the experience of 4 billion plus users. So you have like multiplicative effect as you go up the stack. But it is also an area where you have to have very opinionated execution. In general, infrastructure is a place because you know the space very well, you have to be opinionated. You can't just go with consensus model. You can't build infrastructure just by figuring out what most people in the room like. You have to be very opinionated, and you actually work at least 2 to 3 levels above your current level. So my partners in daily execution are VPs because I'm impacting their businesses. So if I have to have an issue, I work with VPs directly because they are the ones who sort of have an influence on their organization. It could be a VP of capacity, it could be a VP for Instagram. So even though I'm not senior that senior in the organization, because my work impacts different businesses within the organization, I have to work with very senior people. So if you like are good at managing up, for example, that is a great place to be because you are actually communicating on a daily basis with VPs, and you're working multiple levels above your current level.
Got it. Actually, I want to ask about metrics as well because as a customer facing PM, like I'm also a platform PM. I think platform PM itself is slightly difficult to when you think about the OKRs, metrics, and all of that stuff. How does it work for an infrastructure PM?
It very much depends on the organization. Microsoft and Amazon are sort of more mature in that way because they have been doing infrastructure for many years. Meta, I would say we didn't have infrastructure PMs for many years. Meta was a pure growth company for the first 18 years, right? So we're just growing, growing, growing. We didn't ever have like time to think about what exactly is the right thing to build. So we are still a bit early in the process of setting up metrics. But the good thing is we can always work with our sort of upper level stakeholders and partners to depend on metrics. So eventually the goal is, let's say, to increase revenue from ads on Instagram. That's a metric that the entire organization, the entire stack can rally behind, right? So that way we don't really have to worry that much about metric. Yes, that's an aggregate metric and you have to break it down into lower levels of the stack. How much of that comes from the ML engineer? How much of that comes from the AI infra engineer? And versus what exactly is infrastructure responsible for? We have to boil down the metric, but the company goal is pretty straightforward, and we know what exactly we're working towards. And that's like even public information in some cases where, okay, we want to acquire more users. We want to get to like whatever 100 million plus threads daily active users. So we start there, and then you work backward from that. Funnily enough, backward is a thing we learned at Amazon, and now I'm applying that to Microsoft at Meta because I know the end goal, get to 100 million for threads, and then let's backward from that. What does infrastructure need to deliver for that?
I want to ask one more thing. Like, let's say I want to understand basics of infrastructure because just to have a good conversation, just to understand what other people are doing, are there any resources that you can provide? Just basics.
Yeah, there are a bunch of, I would say, resources online that talk about just a very simple constructs of cloud, simple constructs of things like multi-tenancy, simple concepts of inference engine, right? These things, like the way we have structured them, yes, it is fairly complicated in the sort of global scale. But if you want to just shrink it down and look at what a cloud is, it is basically a laptop. You're just not accessing it from this keyboard, you're accessing it from somewhere else. That's it. It has memory, it has storage, it has compute, does everything you need to. Now think of that laptop at a global scale that serves 4 billion people. That's a private cloud. So there's definitely simplifications here, but the challenge comes from the scale. It doesn't come from the fact that this is a very complicated technology. Yes, it is fairly complicated. You are running something like an AI model, you're training it on terabytes of data, but the complexity is because it is terabytes of data. If you had to, you sort of train a small model in a small amount of data set, pretty straightforward. When you multiply that by 1,000, yes, that's where complicated.
Essentially, the whole internet, right? Sometimes.
It is. It is sometimes more than the whole internet, but yes.
Awesome. Yeah, and Rahul, are there any books you would recommend, or any books that you read and you think would be helpful for others?
Doesn't have to be infrastructure or PM, like anything in broad.
Yeah, I would say there are two things that you will have to do if you're like if you really want to work in this space. One is obviously, as I said, deal with extreme ambiguity, and then you should be very good at context switching. So one of the things that helped me there is there's a book called First 90 Days. Anytime I switch jobs, and I do that every 2 to 3 years, unfortunately, or even like my roles in the company, I read that book because it tells you what exactly is sort of the success plan for when you move to a different team, a new organization, or different role. What should I do in the first 90 days? I think second book I would recommend is Getting Stuff Done. It's basically a book about how do you like break down the big problems into small, and how do you avoid information overload. Like as I said, in Amazon, I was working on 30 plus projects at the same time. How do I make sure I'm doing context switching and I'm not getting burnt out by that? How do I compartmentalize so I can get some like consolidated focus time to write the right document and actually use that for sort of spreading the information around, making sure my team can sort of rally behind that. Same thing at Meta. This week we had multiple saves internally, but I still need to find time to write out the product strategy so that my rest of my team is unblocked for next week. So how do I do that without sort of getting too bogged down by all the pings, all the emails I'm getting? So Getting Things Done is definitely a very good book that helps you structure that chaos. And you'll be dealing with a lot of chaos as an infrastructure PM. So definitely helps to have a structure in mind on how to deal with that complexity.
Awesome. Thank you. Yeah. Thanks, Rahul. Thanks for your time. So if anybody wants to reach out to you or find you or read more about you, where can they find you?
On LinkedIn, I regularly post updates on LinkedIn, and all the things we work on at Meta, we generally present at the Product at Scale or Efficiency at Scale conferences. So IP Next is a published paper. ICSP, the layer, the service management layer that I worked on, is also a published paper. And my most recent work on capacity management and operations, we recently gave a talk in Product at Scale. So yeah, feel free to read and reach out to us if you're interested in this kind of role. Immense amount of complexity, but definitely very satisfying and a very impactful role.
Awesome. Yeah. So for anybody who wants to either follow Rahul or reach out to Rahul, yeah, we'll give us a LinkedIn in the description, and also all of the papers you have mentioned, we'll add it in the description. So please check it out. Awesome. Thanks a lot for spending some time with us, Rahul. Thank you.
Yep.
Thanks,
Sid. Thanks, Funny.